This video will cover dialogue normalization and cleanup. Here are my audio files. I have a room tone I recorded in the same room in which I recorded the voices. And these 10 audio files are the lines I recorded. My first step is to rename these lines. I do not want to rename the room tone, so I uncheck that. I will only be renaming the lines themselves, and I'll be following the naming convention in our documentation. I start with some sort of identifier for what module or chapter this is. In this case, it's module 1, so I'll type mod1 underscore VO since it's voice lines. Next is the character being played, which is the pilot commander. I'll type that in camel case underscore the name of the actor, and this was recorded by Allison, underscore raw, since this is raw audio. No processing has been done to this yet. One more underscore, and finally, I will add a renumbering counter at the end. Under the counting tab, I want my counters to begin at 10 and increment by 10 each time. Here we can see the new name that will be assigned to these files, and because of how we set up our counter, it will increment by 10 each file. The reason I have each file number increment by 10 is in case I need to record more lines in between these lines later. For example, if I have a new line that needs added in between line 1 and 2, rather than having to name it line 1.5, I can just name it line 15. Now that those are all renamed, the next step is to head over into iZotope RX and pull up the batch processing window. I'll click Add to add a new process, and this is a dialogue cleanup process. Now that we've made a new process, I can add new processing steps down here. By hitting the plus sign, I've added a new step. The first step that I want to add is normalization. What normalization does is it takes the highest amplitude, or the loudest moment in an audio file, and then increases or decreases the overall volume of the entire file based on that loudest moment to a new target volume. For example, if my loudest moment is -8 and I'm normalizing to -6, then a 2 decibel increase would be applied. Something to look out for is if during your recording session there's a loud noise, for example, a door closing or the microphone getting bumped, then that loudest point is the reference that your normalization is going to use, rather than referencing the loudest point of the voice itself. Clicking on the View button for a processing step allows me to see the current settings of that step. Moving this slider sets the level that the loudest point in this audio file will be moved to, whether by an increase or decrease in gain. Right now, I'm choosing to normalize this audio to -6. In order to save these changes to the settings of this specific step, I need to hit the record button on that step. If I ever need to check my settings again, I can just click View and see that it's still at -6. Next, I'll add the spectral denoise module to remove the background noise of my dialogue. If I drag in the room tone file, I can use it as a reference of the noise that I want to remove. If I click on the time selection tool, I can highlight a large section of the room tone while being careful not to select any clicks or pops. I'll pull back up the batch process, hit View under the spectral denoise module to see the settings, and then click Learn to use my time selection as a reference of the noise that I would like to remove. The numbers that you set on the threshold and reduction sliders will depend on how much noise is in your files. For this example, I'm going to set reduction at 10 and threshold at 0. Finally, I check that the quality slider is slid all the way over to D. Now that I've set these settings, I need to save them or record them to the processing step. Similar to how compression works, I find that running 2 instances of spectral denoise at lower reduction values is often more effective than running a single instance with high reduction values. On this second instance, I will set a slightly lower reduction value and hit record on the second processing step to save these settings. If I click View on each processing step, I can see that the settings are appropriately at 10 and 8. If I drag in one of the dialogue files I recorded, we can visually see this noise here in the background, probably the ventilation system or something like that. Since this noise here is from the same room that I recorded the room tone from and saved into the spectral denoise profile, when I run the process, it dramatically reduces the volume on the background noise. Sometimes, if your reduction is too extreme, it will add a lot of artifacts into the audio file, making it sound washy, almost as if it's underwater. Now that all the processing steps are set up, I'll drag in all the audio files. I want to not copy the results to the original file folder. Rather, I want to choose a folder that's already on my desktop called ISO exports. I do want to modify the name, but not inside of RX. So I'll keep the same name. I want the file format to be broadcast wave, BWF. And now I can click process. Once the processing is done, I can go to the folder on my desktop to access the new files. Since I kept the same name, these files say that they're raw, but they're not. I just processed them. So I'll navigate to this folder from my batch rename program. I could replace the entire name and change raw to denoised, but there may be circumstances when I'm adding different files where I really need the rest of the name to stay the same based on their counter numbers. So in this case, I can add a different processing step. Let's add find and replace. And I can find the word raw and replace it with denoised. Click rename, and now all my files are appropriately named.